But what became clear by early 2000, 2001, 2, was that goals were getting in the way. And what we proved
Seemed
in the
too hard of a
series,
drive towards a goal, an
it's
outcome.
too specific. And what we have proved now with two of the three fMRI studies, the other one was on leadership relationships, and the two hormonal studies that doctoral students have done with 35 and 49-year-olds, is that the certification agencies and the GROW model have it wrong.
Hello and welcome to the coaching studio. I'm Lyssa and Dr, your host. And today, kicking off season 4 is Dr. Richard Boyatzis. Dr. Boyatzis has a PhD and a Master's of Arts in Social Psychology from Harvard University and a Bachelor of Science in Aeronautics and Astronautics from MIT. He is a distinguished university professor at Case Western University and a fellow of the American Psychological Association, the Society for Industrial and Organizational Psychology, and the Association for Psychological Sciences. His research interests run the gamut through leadership, the development of emotional intelligence, competency, coaching, and the neuroscience of change. He is the author of more than 200 articles and 9 books, to include the book that I have been most profoundly impacted by, Helping People Change. Dr. Boyatzis will likely be well known to you, especially if you geek out on neuroscience in the helping professions. He has taught over 1.5 million students through his many MOOCs on Coursera, and you may have even had the opportunity to hear him speak in one of his many speeches, seminars, or a podcast all around the globe. I must say that I'm in the middle of a bucket list moment meeting with Dr. Boyatzis today, as I've been an avid consumer of his research, and his work has impacted my thinking in profound ways. It is a tremendous honor to welcome Dr. Boyatzis to the studio. You're a rocket scientist. Let's just cut to the chase. What led from being a rocket scientist to being a social
Okay,
psychologist?
there are different parts to it. It wasn't just one thing. One starts out that my parents are immigrants from Greece in the 30s. And in 1949 and 50, when I was in kindergarten, I spoke with English with a Greek accent. I could read Greek letters, but I couldn't read English letters. And PS 150 decided that that meant that I had some form of retardation. It was before multiculturalism. Now, that wasn't the only time they tried to lead me back. There were 2 more times in a few years. And each time my mother homeschooled me for a while, caught me up and put me back in. So my father was a waiter. I mean, he got out of the US Army after 2 years in Panama and landing on Omaha Beach and going through France and Germany and all that. So he gets out and he was a waiter, and he and my mother bought this small house in a working class community out in Nassau County, and Sputnik goes up. So in 1957 or thereafter, they tested every kid in every public school across America. And it turned out that I tested really high in math and physics. And they then, as I was about to start 6th grade, offered my father worked every day from 3 in the afternoon to 3 in the morning, so he couldn't go to any of these meetings. My mother went. And they offered I could either skip 2 grades or they could put me in a special program, which in 1959 was the beginning of what we now know as the AP program, or 1957, I should say, 58. So we had, junior high school, and 2 years of college, all in 6 years. Anyway, I took that option. I loved it, did really well. Got into my dream school, MIT, and got in the program I wanted to be, which I wanted to work on space vehicles. And in September of 1964, I started at MIT working on space vehicles. But I ran out of money by my junior year. And MIT had a program, because there were quite a few of us that were at MIT that were upwardly mobile from working class backgrounds. And I'd run out of money because my parents couldn't help me out, a few $100s, that was it. And I'd saved up enough for almost a year through my music work, my band work in high school. But I had taken out so many loans that neither the federal government nor any bank would allow me any more loans. I had gotten all the scholarships my grades would allow. But MIT had this program where they could get you a job doing what you were training to do. And the only difference was you didn't have a degree yet, but you were. So I got a job at Northrop Neuer in the Experimental Gas Dynamics Research Unit with a whole bunch of other folks. Most of them had master's degrees. But, I mean, I didn't know a lot of specifics, but I knew a lot of the same stuff. And after 5.5 months of that, because you're paid at the full rate, if you saved the money, you had enough to finish, which is exactly what I did. Now, there were two of my other fraternity brothers who were with me who had the same situation. We did reasonably well. Northrop offered each of us jobs as soon as we graduated. The problem was in 1966, I couldn't be in the space program because my eyes, I required
Oh,
glasses. And in those days, there was no such thing as corrective surgery. So I was designing, and that's my specialty was designing control systems of interplanetary vehicles. And that's what I worked on at Northrop. But I was in one of two research departments, and it was like two departments of Sheldon's. I mean, everybody in the two departments, were either really smart or scary smart,
right.
including the managers. And, everybody was weird, socially inept and weird. And I couldn't believe how little the managers got out of us and how, on the whole, they weren't abusive, but they were just interpersonally incompetent.
Hmm.
And I just said to myself, I don't want to spend 8 hours a day sitting in a cubicle doing computer programs and solving, flight problems that would periodically come up with more computer programs. I didn't want to go in the restaurant business, which my father and every Greek male I knew, which were almost all of our family and friends in New York, were in the restaurant business.
Right.
I didn't think I was quite good enough with my music to go pro, and I didn't want to be an aerospace scientist engineer. So the three of us are driving back cross country to get in time to register for the spring semester, which we just barely make. And it dawns on me somewhere across the country that what I can try is management. And literally, what I thought
Mhm.
of, it's got to be easy. Look at these idiots we had as managers
Right.
at Northrop.
They can
So,
do it.
so MIT had this thing where professors in the management school that had courses that didn't have prerequisites would get up in one session and describe their course, and then the undergraduates would try to run to the classrooms to get in because everything was oversubscribed. And this one young fellow, Dave Kolb, who many people know from experiential learning theory and learning style inventory and such, he gets up and he's finishing his PhD in the psychology program at Harvard. But he was a full faculty member, and he describes a course that to me sounds like crap. It's organizational psychology. But in his description, he said two words that made me run to the basement to get into his class: no tests. So
Sprint.
if there was a second pivotal moment in my journey, it was the fact that I later, as a psychologist, learned that I'm test phobic.
Interesting and quick, clearly, because you got into the class.
Yeah, that's right. And as a part of that, I told him I wanted to do my term paper on how managers didn't help their subordinates. He said, instead of doing it just on the basis of your experience, how would you like to work some real data? We just finished collecting 2 years of data from their version of the MBAs on how they helped or didn't help each other with weekly data collected. I busted my ass for that paper. I mean, I did a
Mhm.
lot more than anybody would for a term paper in one course. He liked how I started it all. He offered me a summer job. During the summer, he introduced me to other key faculty. And so my senior year, I'm taking my three actually two required, one elective technically to finish my degree. But then I had all sorts of other electives. So I'm taking them. And because of the introductions, I was taking doctoral seminars,
Mhm.
PhD seminars with Ed Schein, kind of
Mm.
major figure in our field.
Yeah.
I took two with him and he became a personal mentor. and 2 with Everett Hagen, who started the Psychoanalytic Lay Historical Society with Eric Erickson, and 1 with Dave
Amazing.
McClellan on social. I mean, they introduced me to people who I didn't know because I wasn't in the fields
Right.
of a psychology or applied psychology, but they were giants even then. Well,
Yeah.
in no time at all, Dave Kolb and Ed Schein, in particular, took me under their wing and said, "Look, you should go to graduate school." And I said, "I don't have any money. I can't pay for it." They said, "Well, usually you can find ways to get money." I said, "Okay." They had to explain to me that because I didn't know what came next. I didn't know that you get a master's degree, then a doctorate. And they said, "No, no, except in psychology, you actually apply directly for a doctorate. And if you pass your exams, they give you a master's along the way." So they did that. And then they said, "And you'd be wasted in management. You should go in psychology. That's where your real talent was."
That's
So they helped me.
amazing.
I
Yeah.
mean, in my arrogance, I applied to 2 PhD programs, one at Harvard and one at Boston College, got into both. And in a very telling moment of wrestling which program to go to, um, I was being anti-elitist. I didn't want to go to Harvard just because it was Harvard. And BC had offered me full
All
ride with
right.
stipend for 4 years. Harvard let me in because of my odd background in aerospace and science and math, but they didn't give me any money. And it was one of my fraternity brothers, a younger one, who said to me, "You've never studied psychology. Which program would give you a better chance to fill in all of the foundational stuff that you missed? Because you're going to be a doctor program with a whole lot of people who have bachelor's degrees in psychology." And it was
Hmm.
true, from very good places. So I went to Harvard. And
Amazing.
what became clear was they let me in because of the math. They thought I would help mathematical modeling of psychological processes, when what I was drawn to was the interpersonal process of helping. So it was in my second year in the doctoral program that I started working with Dave McClellan on some of the power research with alcoholics. And the Brockton VA, which was primarily a mental health hospital at the time, had a huge alcoholism unit. And they called him and said, "We'd like to meet with you because you proposed in this recent book that you had an idea as to how you might help alcoholics with a new kind of program. We'd like to try it." So he asked me if I would design it because I was the doctoral student working on the ideas, but had more interest. And at that point, I'd been doing training in group techniques and in training as a clinician. So I started a therapy program based on the research that Dave McClellan was doing, and I had joined, but others
Wow.
had at Brockton. And so let me go back though. The paper I started to work on with Dave Kolb in the spring of '67, we eventually published. And we actually wrote 3 papers, 2 of which got published, and they were on helping relationships. So I actually started on the intellectual theme that the helping people change is about in 1967.
It's amazing. And
And
I
I
mean,
started because I had to pay sorry, one more thing,
oh
because I had
yeah.
to pay my way through school. I'd already tapped out on, nobody would offer me any more money. I had to work. So I was teaching courses at Harvard and I was having to do consulting and training programs. So I started formally coaching as a coach to executives in 1969.
Yeah.
I mean, the arrogance of me as a 22-year-old coaching these 50-something-year-old executives was um, a gas. I
Magnificent.
look back. Yeah.
And I mean, the opportunity. And I mean, coaching wasn't a thing yet, formally yet either.
Well, it
So it's
was
this,
actually. It was quite. That's a lot of. There's a lot of rhetoric about. ICF says, well, the coaching profession started in '91. Bullshit. In 1967, Walt Mahler, who was a faculty member in Michigan, retired. And one of the things he was famous for was called the Coaching Practices Survey. He went around showing and having managers and doing training programs and how to teach managers to be coaches. So coaching under that
is
label has been
way older.
around a long time. That's right.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that's fascinating.
But
Well,
but
and I
the
think,
the actual major theme for me is how people change. So in fact,
Right.
my new book that's coming out in October is an integration, a synthesis of 58 years of my research on how do people change from individuals to communities and even
Mhm.
countries. And that's my work on intentional change theory, which you mentioned in your introduction. And that's been my path all along. So a lot of people know me because of my work on competencies, and they claim I'm one of the 5 people who started the whole movement in HR. But later, decades later, we repackaged it and called it emotional intelligence. Some people know me from that, and the neuroscience, which is a method of doing the research. But the theme all along is how do we get sustained desired change? And
Well,
then the role of those of us who try to help it.
yeah, and I mean, and that's been sort of where I intersected with you first. Was I was really looking, I came from, I'm a clinical social worker, so I came from a background of doing actual work. I worked with the military, not unlike you, running groups, but also doing actual therapy with families and with violence and things of that nature. And so trauma,
Yep.
PTSD, complex trauma, and dissociative disorders was sort of my specialty before I became a coach. And so one of the things that was really fascinating to me is as I'm looking at coaching and I come across your work. This was back in the, I don't know, 2013, something like that. And I'm starting to look at your work around positive emotional attraction and negative
Right.
emotional attraction. And I'm really looking at this idea of like, we have to get the brain of the human being that we're talking to invested and involved in their own agency and process. And I'm reading your work. For me, the way, one, it helped that there was research and it wasn't just some super
Right.
smart rocket scientist turned,
Right.
psychologist who's telling us this wonderful stuff. But you're really doing research at that point that is showing the difference about how we approach an engagement and create safety and open
Yeah.
things up for the person's internal insights to come forward. And so I would love to like how did that start to evolve out of the work that you were doing then?
Well, a lot similar to you, although I was doing a certain amount of this competency work and management training uh, to pay my tuition while I was doing some also teaching.
Which
But
was good for you that you were so broke, honestly.
yeah, honestly, because it forced me to do a lot of stuff. Now, I didn't get as high grades as one would think, but I got sufficient grades to graduate.
Which is what really matters.
Right. Um, But I developed this therapy program that we started training therapists to work with alcoholics and drug addicts in 1970. And I continued that till about 76. I was at because the feds kept hiring me to train therapists in eventually 15 cities around the US. I had 5 other psychologists working with me. But as you know, when you're doing group therapy and you're training therapists, you do it by doing therapy groups with them and a bunch of patients. In this case, you could say clients, but most of them, because this was 70 through 76.
And the
So a
VA, they were
lot that,
patients.
oh yeah, a lot of it was the VA and around the country. And a lot of it were returning Vietnam veterans who were pretty strung out on booze. And in those days, it was more likely heroin than it was cocaine. But what became clear was that if you didn't capture people's deep sense of purpose, you were not going to help them battle the unbelievable power of a biochemical addiction.
Right. Right.
And
Right.
and this is where being a whole bunch of different kinds of psychologists helped. It was very clear that because I was studying groups with Bales, Freed Bales at Harvard for years, and others that, and he had done key work with Talcott Parsons in the 40s on um, Irish immigrant families and why they drank so much and got so aggressive and all that. And the basic research I was doing was on why some men got aggressive when they drank and others didn't. But it was very clear that while I was looking at individual characteristics, physiological and psychological, the other thing was the cultural and family issues were huge. And it was very clear no matter what we did with a client patient in the programs, no matter how we did therapy with them one-on-one. If we didn't have some way to intervene in their families and in what might be left of any work groups, they were going to be back drinking or using in a matter of months,
Right.
which is true. So the other thing that was profound about this on the discovery was I just posted it yesterday on LinkedIn, as a nice teaser to my new book, because the line I used was, our relationships are the agar agar of the petri dish of life.
Mm-hmm.
And what most people don't fully appreciate is you can't help an individual change by working with the individual only. You have to
Right.
work multiple parts of the system of which they're a part. The same thing applies. You can't help an organization without working with teams and dyads and individuals and the community. So one of the things that became very clear while I was still in my PhD program is that this theory that Dave Kolb and I started working on in 1967, that eventually became what I call intentional change theory, was a fractal. Although at the time, I didn't realize it was
Yeah.
really a fractal because
Yeah. Just
we
that.
didn't have the same language. I did realize it was nonlinear. And I would say at the time, I would have described it as isomorphic, a similar process. By 2000, I was teaching a graduate course in complexity theory in our School of Engineering with several other faculty colleagues who were co-teaching. And that's when it dawned on me that I really had a fractal. It wasn't isomorphic. And that's when I needed, if I'm going to deal with fractals of multiple levels of dyads, teams, organizations, communities, even countries, excuse me, I needed something that, from complexity theory terms, would tip you into the next phase of the change, but also allow you to move emotion, because you're humans, emotion across levels. And that was when it was somewhere around the year 2000, I articulated the positive and negative emotional attractor. Because all of a sudden I realized that I was missing something in the theory.
Mm-hmm.
I was missing something that helped you to move.
Yeah.
And the key was that most people don't. So the likelihood that you start on some change process and continue is like 5%. That's why the amount of change we have from psychotherapy, from education, from training, from coaching is
Mm-hmm.
so abysmal compared to the amount of energy put into it.
Yeah. Hi, Lyssa here. I want to interrupt real quick and just say thank you for being a viewer on this channel. I very much appreciate you being here. And I'd also like to make an invitation to you. I love to meet people and have more one-to-one interactions with them. And to that end, I have a monthly coaching Q&A. We cover all kinds of topics, coaching related, and I would love to invite you, my treat, to that those monthly coaching sessions. You can find a link below, and I want to just say thank you, and I look forward to meeting you on a monthly Q&A soon. Cheers. And now back to your regularly scheduled programming. Yeah. Well, and I think a lot of coaches are doing the work versus finding ways to invite the client to do the work, which is exactly what happens when you engage them in their own process. It's sort of interesting with the positive emotional attraction theory. It is the thing I think that underpins all safety in conversations, because I remember when I was working with the military in the late 90s and early 2000s, we were doing motivational interviewing. And I think that was a piece of it, right? Where you're really getting buy-in by the
Yeah, right.
patient, client, to what it is that they want so that they're invested. But to your point, if then we're still doing the emotional attraction,
Yeah.
what
See,
what
and
just showed up for you?
what became very clear to me, even though in the 1970 article that Kolb and I published, two of them actually, but one of them showed very clearly, if you set goals, you're going to change more. By the 90s, I started to wonder about that. And by 2000, and I started doing a lot more, because prior to that, I'd done a lot of work in the hormonal systems, the nervous
Mhm.
systems, but not the neurology. I really started to dive into that heavily. And then within a few years, started actually doing some of the fMRI studies with one with folks at the Cleveland Clinic, and then a series of them with my good friend, Professor Tony Jack at Case. But what became clear by early 2000, 2001, 2, was that goals were getting in the way. And what we proved
Became
in the
too hard of a
series,
drive towards a goal, an
it's
outcome.
too specific. And what we have proved now with 2 of the 3 fMRI studies, the other one was on leadership relationships, and the 2 hormonal studies that doctoral students have done with 35 and 49-year-olds, is that the certification agencies and the GROW model have it wrong. That if you start a coaching process with a statement of a clear objective, even if it's the client's objective, you have now closed their mind to new ideas. And let me make it even worse. If you start with focusing on a problem, this was the problem. I had this problem in the 70s with a lot of other therapists. I used to give talks in psychology departments, in medical departments, and in clinical social work programs, and saying, now I can say, if you focus on the person's problem for more than 5 minutes, you're sucking them into the quicksand of the NEA.
Yeah.
Then of course, you're going to make a lot more revenue because you're going to have a
They'll
lot
never
more
leave.
sessions with them. Right.
Yeah.
But they won't be really open to change. So what became very clear was, as I said in my new book, in a whole chapter, that goal setting has a part in the process, but it's about 80% of the way into the coaching.
Yeah.
It's nowhere near the beginning. Why? Because it literally puts blinders on people, because when you set goals, it activates the frontal parietal control network, which if you do any analytic work about the goal, like you think about a number or a specific, it activates the task positive network. And then you're into a stress response. So
Right.
you literally, you go down to, as one set of scientists showed, you go from 180 degrees peripheral vision to 30 degrees. And what that means is you're focused, but you may have focused prematurely, almost guaranteed. And what happens is, as we've said and even the fMRI study that just got published last year showed very clearly that even 30 minutes of talking about the dream, the vision, the purpose, the big picture, as I like to call it, of a person, was more powerful to help them open up to new ideas and learning than to talk about their specific presenting problem.
So you're making me really sad, happy, but happy as you're talking about this. But part of the reason it's making me happy is I've really struggled with SMART goals my entire career. Because it really just feels like, okay, so we're just tackling, it's very tactical. We're going to strategically tackle this problem. And one of the things that I really work on, and I call it an embodied grounded goal. But what we're coming up with is, what is the state of being you want to be having? That everything that needs to be explored is going to come up when you're not being in that state.
Right.
And it's that state that will allow whatever your goal is to happen.
Here's the length. You're exactly right. Listen, exactly right. This is the language that I use. I call it in my theory the ideal self. But another word that I often use synonymously is your personal vision. And what that is, and I have a whole chapter on it, but I've published a number of papers on it. It's a combination of your sense of purpose, your sense of meaning, if you feel it, your calling, your core values, not the contingent values, part of your social identities, and this whole thing that happens that's a bit fuzzy that we call the dream.
Right. And it's that sense of
well, as you were saying, what I say to people, I don't really do any more coaching except for my graduate students, but when I was doing it up till 2 years ago, and somebody would start, they're always going to start with the presenting problem. But my thing is, don't let them talk for more than 3 to 4 minutes about it. And then what I do is I would literally, even if they were presidents of companies, I'd say, that's important. And we're going to come back to it. But first, help me. I want to understand the big
Yes.
picture of you. I want
Yes.
to understand the you of the strategy of you.
Yeah. Yeah.
So let's step back. I would literally have them do homework exercises. I would have them, that were reflective. And I would not let us talk about any feedback or any specific problem or issue until I felt they had developed a compelling as well as comprehensive personal vision. Now, when we do this with the graduate students, the 30, 40, 50, and 60-year-olds, we make them write it out, and they
Yeah.
have to talk about, and here's the guide question is this: if your life were fantastic, we're absolutely perfect, 10 to 15 years from now, what would it be like? So we're saying your life, not just work, 10 to 15 years, because we want people to break with reality. We want them to
Right.
dream. And we absolutely perfect. So what happens is we basically try to draw out a very clear image, a vision
Mm-hmm.
of where you'd be, who you'd be with, if anyone. But we want to know about your physical health, your spiritual health, your romantic health. We want to know about your contributions to the community. And oh, yeah, your job or career.
Right.
But
As an element, but not as the
that's
focus.
right. As a matter of
Yeah.
fact, we very often come to it last.
Yeah.
Now, the 30-year-olds only do it first because they don't, they'll say things like, well, I'm not going to even think about getting married or having a relationship or a family until I'm successful. By the time I'm doing it, the 40 or the 50 or the 60-year-olds, their whole thing is, boy, I've got to
Tick,
rebalance
tick,
my
tick,
life
tick.
because, yeah, it's out of whack.
Yeah.
So I think this notion of finding meaning. Now, the thing that's fascinating is in the research that a bunch of us have been doing now, we find the same thing in our relationships. So when you say, well, what is a high quality relationship? We actually have been measuring this since 2007. It's one in which there is a high degree of shared vision, not
Mm-hmm.
goals. And we even showed that treatment adherence, which is abysmal. Treatment adherence, as you know from your clinical days, but treatment adherence is around 50% of any disease or after any surgery, anywhere in the world, including the United States. Why are people so stupid? Because physicians and nurses try to scare the crap out of you, and that's not motivating.
Well, and if
So
it's
what
not
happens
linked to
is,
your vision of the kind of life you want to lead,
that's right.
then
And
then why are you doing these
yeah,
random things that these doctors are telling you to do?
well, because the motivation is about the power of a New Year's Eve resolution. Of
Yeah,
course, I should get fit, lose weight,
of
and I'll join
course.
a health club and go for 2 weeks. But Masood Khawaja showed that treatment adherence went up when the patient thought that they and their physician had the same vision, not goals, vision,
Right.
sense of
Vision.
purpose. And so we know that's part of a key relationship in dyads. And I believe the same thing in coaching dyads. We now have
So
research to show in teams and even organizations. And I have some anecdotal case analyses that showing it's more likely to help communities combat things like homelessness or economic development if it's truly shared.
if it's truly shared, and that's incredibly hopeful, because
Right.
that's something that's we can learn how to do as
That's right.
practitioners. And so here's something that I'd love to just sort of, this is going to kind of, I don't think it's left field, but it's a kind of a complex question, which I've now preambled. But I mean, one of the things that I often think about when I'm working with coaches, learning how are you, I call it directionality, but this idea of how we explore things, and people are like, well, what, you're never supposed to talk about any negative emotions of da 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 da. And I say, no, it's not that, but you have to learn how to do it safely so that the client understands why they're exploring the anxiety or the imposter syndrome or insert X whatever here, towards the state of being they want to move towards, confidence, whatever that is, right? So that the exploration happens for the purpose of moving in the direction of their, what, this dream or vision of how they want to be
Right.
instead.
Right.
And I'm curious because I think that's a piece that people don't seem to like just get when they read
Here,
your work.
right. Here's an easy way to think about it. One of the themes of the positive versus negative emotional attractor, which is a condition inside of each one of us, but also inside our teams, our organizations, our communities. But let's stay at the individual level for a moment. One difference is that you're experiencing the parasympathetic nervous system because that's the only antidote to stress. We call it renewal for shorthand. Stress, even annoying stress, like your cell phone drops a call,
Mhm.
ends up piling on for us. And even pre-COVID was such that most of us as professionals were living lives of cognitive, emotional, and perceptual impairment. And when people said, well, let's lower your stress for you, that was really stupid because you were just going to be mildly impaired instead of severely impaired. If you look at the physiology of it, the only antidote is this parasympathetic or renewal activation. And people know what some of those things are like. Meditation helps, yoga helps, prayer helps to a loving
Walking in
God,
the woods helps.
walking in the woods, exactly. But the key is that, and we published, Dan Goldman and I and Udayandar and John Osiri published an article after a series of studies showing that if we looked at people's balance of stress experiences and renewal experiences during a typical week, and we did 3 different studies, each with 300 to 500 people in them. And what we were able to show was that, yes, the more moments you have of renewal compared to stress in a given week, the higher will be your well-being, your life satisfaction, your career satisfaction, your engagement, your resilience, your empathy, your demonstrated empathy as other people experience it. You're less anxious, less depressed.
I love that
Okay.
there's research for this. Honestly, I love that you've done the research on it because I think like it makes sense, but to have research behind it means
Right.
it's empirical.
So here's the other part of it. What becomes very clear when you look at the distribution of the data is it's important to have many briefer episodes during a day. So it's more
Mm.
important to have 10, 15-minute episodes of renewal throughout the day than to have an hour and a half at lunch or go exercise for an hour and a half. This is why. And this feeds into your original question, Lyssa. The stress hormones are going to be the default of your body because your body is going to defend itself. That's how we're designed.
Right.
So, and that means you go into stress mode because that's the best defense. And the only difference is today, a lot of the threats that invoke the stress response are social or organizational. Every time somebody wants to put another metric on the dashboard, these idiots are creating more and more stress.
Yeah.
So, or you look at the news and you freak out. So what's happening is you're having a huge buildup of stress, mostly mild or annoying, but sometimes acute during a day. And if you don't interrupt the hormonal flow, it's
Mm.
going to build on each other. So that's the way to think about it is how do you interrupt the hormonal flow and flip your hormones? And now we know even 10 minutes of deep breathing, I mean, hell, even 2 minutes of a deep breathing exercise
Yeah.
can not just reduce your blood pressure, which is a sign that you've flipped the hormones, but actually all of a sudden makes you open to learning or change, makes
That's
you
so
open to another
awesome.
human being or emotions, makes you, not only helps your immune system click in, but it makes you cognitively able to handle more complex things.
So take all those little breaks. I used to tell people, they would say, I need to learn to meditate. And I'm like, well, it would be even better for you if for the 2 minutes you're sitting on the toilet 5 times a day, you focus on your breathing, than it
Right.
would be to try and do an hour of meditation. So basically, you have put scientific evidence behind my
Yeah.
idea. So I love you forever, just so you know.
But
But
let's extend that a little more before we leave. Let's extend that a little
yeah.
more. COVID accentuated something that people were playing around with before, which is, well, suppose you eliminate breaks and lunch and just work 3 days a week. It's horrible. It's a stupid idea. Well, what COVID did is it forced people to be alone. Now we accentuated every neuroses that people had, including a lot of agoraphobia. So now we go into 2020, and by 2021, we've got legions of people everywhere in the world scared to go out. They're scared to talk to other people. And what happens by 2022 when the vaccines are available? A whole lot of, excuse me, but stupid people weren't taking the vaccines, or they were refusing to go out, even if they did social distancing and wore masks, because they were too scared. So now we have the largest mental health crisis in the world going on around extreme loneliness.
Yeah.
I mean, the
Well, and I was
Gallup
going to
report that
ask
just
you
came out
about
said
that.
49% of people with full-time jobs are suffering from loneliness. It said every day. That's
Well, and this
crazy.
kind of goes back to something you said earlier, and it's something that I definitely believe in. I mean, we don't solve relational issues outside of relationship, right? Like and all issues are somewhat relational since we're a relational species. So
Yep.
how do we support people with this loneliness? Because it's a chicken and the egg thing, right?
One of the things we do is we help people appreciate, and that's part of what we did with this this test that we developed to try to look at normal moments of renewal and stress, not the extreme ones, is that about half of the things you could do for renewal, you do alone. Meditate, yoga, prayer, jog, walk in the woods. But half of them you do with other people.
Mm.
Laugh with each other, have fun at a family dinner, and caring for people who are having difficulty. Caring for the elderly has been shown. I like to tell my graduate students, caring for your elderly professors will get you closer to heaven.
Super important.
Yeah,
It'll
right.
help your mental health.
Yeah, and your grade in my class, at any rate. So part of it is appreciating the fact, and I remember saying to Ellen Van Osten and Melvin Smith, my co-authors on helping people change, and we've worked together, Ellen and I, since the 90s, Melvin and I since he joined CASE in 2003. But I remember when the COVID thing happened and they closed the university, within 2 months, I said, you know what I miss the most is the 2-minute conversations we'd have in the hallways,
Mhm.
because nobody gets on Zoom for 2 minutes. You
Maybe
know,
we
it's
should make it a thing, though, you know?
if we could figure out how to do it, it'd be nice. But that's the thing that we really lost. And as
Yeah.
people are going back to work, I mean, a lot of people are having this experience where they go back to the office because they're supposed to be there 2 days a week, and nobody else is there on those 2 days. So it's not really
Yeah.
helping yet. But what I was so aware that it was the brief, casual catching up or chats that made that were renewing for me, that
Mhm.
reminded me, especially with the two of them, how much we cared about each other and how much we did together. And each one of us could say 3 words to the other, and it would, kind of
Yeah, and
remind
you
us
could
of,
finish each other's sentences sort of
kind of,
thing.
yeah. Although I'm accused of doing that too often, so I have to somehow control it. But anyway,
I think I just did it to you, so I think
it's
I do
okay. So
too.
it's not just a male thing. Okay,
No,
good.
it isn't. I just I just so very greatly appreciate this conversation. I'd love you to talk a little bit about your new book that's coming out. When is it publishing?
Let me see. I can, whoops, I did the wrong thing here. I will, whoops. There's a picture of it.
Science of
The
Change.
Science of Change, Discovering Sustained Desired Change from Individuals to Organizations and Communities. Oxford University Press is publishing it. It will be shipping in October. It's open for pre-orders now on Amazon all over the world. And what I could tell people if they don't know this is, because I've had this experience with my 4 most recent books, if you pre-order on Amazon, you often get the book 3 weeks before it comes out,
All right, so
because Amazon
pre-ordering,
is huge. Yeah.
yeah,
So pre-order on
pre-ordering.
Amazon. If you, I have the URL, but if you just click on my name or the Science
I'll
of
put a
Change,
link. Don't worry about it. I've got
okay.
you covered. I'll be
Um,
sending people.
Now, here's the thing. The last 4 books that I've run, including Helping People Change, were written for what I'd call normal people, practitioners, but professionals could appreciate it. This one is written for scholars and advanced professionals,
Yeah.
so that it's not that practitioners wouldn't benefit from it. It's that if you're looking for recipes, this isn't the book. If you're
Right. No, but
looking to understand,
this is going to be good for my audience who are primarily coaches and therapists and coaching
right,
managers and people who are interested not just in change, but the science of it, the
right,
neuroscience of it, so that they can do things
and
to
and
support change.
and you can start to understand sometimes subtle differences. Now, not only have I integrated and synthesized 58 years of my work, but I've integrated a lot of other research. And because you read my stuff, that I work in a lot of fields, and I know I freaked out my editor at Oxford University Press when I handed the book in on February 2nd, because there are 115 pages of references. And he
And I've
went,
had that experience with your resume. Yes.
yeah, right. Yeah. Well, that was mine. This is all everybody
Yeah, this
else's.
is everybody else.
But they're little things, not so little. Like in the section on experimentation and practice, I talk about the importance of um, visualizing as a form of practice,
Yeah.
because we now know that it helps to create the neural pathways. I also talked about, we all know that reminders are helpful. Well, I have a section called, when nudging becomes nagging. And what's the difference? Because nudging someone can be PEA, nagging them is NEA.
Right.
And as you said earlier, there's nothing. I mean, my material, for the longest time, people didn't even include me in the positive psychology movement, because I acknowledge the importance of negative emotional attractors and all that. Now they do. And I won the Lifetime Achievement Award at the IPPA last year. But the issue is, we need a lot more of the positive moments to help counterbalance how strong the negative are.
Yeah, it's kind of, I trained with Gottman back in the
Ah,
late
got it.
90s, early 2000s, and that 5-to-1 imbalance towards the
Yep,
positive, I really kind of see it even as the Pareto principle, right? Like if 80% of it is positive and 20% is negative, we're probably going to be okay in a relationship. We can survive stuff, we can
yep.
work through things. But what I'm really hearing is that this idea of how we focus our questions as coaches is really important, because if what we're doing is we're just focused on the negative, the negative, the negative, and being super strategic, we may ultimately wear out the client's capacity to have excitement even about their own goal anymore.
Well, and the mechanism is actually very straightforward. When we want to change, we have to exercise emotional self control. As soon as you exercise emotional self control, it sets off the stress response, the sympathetic nervous system, which immediately starts to close down your openness to new ideas. So what becomes very clear is that any process of learning and change is a juggling act, or as Tony Jack and I talk about it with the neural networks, because they're happening at thousandths of a second, is the toggle.
Mm-hmm.
Well, behaviorally, that's what we have to do. I mean, when you start meeting with somebody as a coach, if it's hedonic, like they have a problem, then they're starting out in the NEA. But they might just want to grow, in which case it's more eudaimonic. But either way, it's going to be stressful. So one of my former doctoral students, who's even published a whole book on this, Amanda Blake, studies a lot on somatic awareness in coaching.
Mm-hmm.
She starts coaching sessions with deep breathing exercises, just to help people get into that state where they'd be open. My technique is a little different. Um, I will tend to, on every coaching session I have with somebody, open with saying, even if it's only been 3 weeks, update me on your vision. Now,
Yeah.
it's not that their vision might have changed or some part of it, but the real reason I'm doing it is
Remind them.
I want
Yeah.
them to spend a few minutes in the vision. So then they're in the PEA.
Yeah. And I think that's just crucially important. And again, it's not the goal that we're touching base on, it's the vision. And I want to
Yep.
just like, it's really important. I know I have you for a very short amount of time left, but I do have a couple other questions. Um, How do you see coaching evolving? And if you can answer that in sort of a quick way, but how do you see it evolving over the next, say, 5 years or so?
Two themes that I think are going to be very, very strong. One, there's a huge amount of research going on in various countries and research centers. So we are going to get a lot more precise at understanding what helps. What's very clear from the research as it's emerging from a number of different centers, the folks in Germany and Caulfield rather, and Simone and others, Schmerly, but also Eric DeHaan's work on they call it the working alliance, but it's on the quality of the relationship. So I think we're going to understand how to build a coaching relationship that doesn't feel as instrumental.
Mm, more relational.
Yes, that's one theme. And I think as a result, the coaching will get better. I'm sorry, there are three trends. The second one is I think we are going to rediscover peer coaching in groups. Take it away from AA alone and the old years of people sitting around a campfire. And we're going to use it. A lot of companies are now doing it. YPO does it with their meetings. But I think peer coaching in groups will be the democratizing aspect of coaching because it can come to billions of people in the world who can't afford one-on-one coaches because we're all so expensive. The
Yeah.
third one that is going to affect it and at some point help, but probably not at the beginning, is the digitization and artificial intelligence. Right now, as Nikki Terblanche, who I see as the guru of all this, he's a senior faculty at Stellenbosch in South Africa. He's actually developed a few bots and done a lot of really good research on it. That right now, the digitization is mostly in algorithms for matching coaches and clients. That's what Coach Hub does, BetterUp, Ezra, et cetera. And Nikki and a few other colleagues have developed some bots. But it was interesting in a couple of his published studies, he explained that using the bot seems to really help by the time the person knows exactly what they want to change. So at the point that they have specified the goal and they're really excited by it, the bot helps to guide their thinking and as a reminder. It doesn't seem to help with the earliest part around the vision or climbing through all the clatter to figure out what do you really
dealing
want.
with the imposter syndrome to get towards the confidence. Right.
All the and peeling back all the ought selves.
Yeah.
So, but I do believe that there will be forms of artificial intelligence which will help. I don't believe that artificial intelligence, when it actually develops as artificial intelligence, which it isn't really now yet, but when it does, will ever replace the same feeling we have with another human being.
Yeah.
Because coaching is essentially a human interaction.
Yeah.
Now,
it's relational.
Will it help a lot of people who don't get access to a coach? Yes.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
So again, it's another democratizing force. And I think we have to be humble about the fact that those of us who are coaches, we're going to be dealing with the 400 million elites of the world, but there are another, 7.4 billion people alive.
Yeah. Who are going to benefit in some way or another.
Who want to develop.
My final question to you, is there a book or a person who has impacted you that you would recommend to others today?
Well, the book that's had the most impact on me is The Science of Change. Sorry, that's
on multiple levels.
Okay. I don't really have a self-confidence problem, but talk about self-promoting. Sorry, I couldn't avoid that. There have been many. At the individual level, I think we all need people we talk to. I mean, I have two people that I would call my probably all-around coaches. One is my wife, who we've been together for over 50 years. We talk about everything and everything. And And the other is Ellen Van Osten. I mean, even though she's been a student of mine at various levels and now colleagues and co-authors, she's director of our coaching research lab. But I actually turn to her when I need some coaching, and she's, along with my wife, is one of the few people who can get me out of what my wife or Ellen calls my Greek male reactions. So
I,
that's that. Now, in terms of books, um, the things that are the most moving for me tend to be things that are timeless. Martin Buber's I Thou, uh, rereading Carl Rogers on becoming, on being
yeah,
now. There are certain things that feel like they're imparting, a kind of degree of caring wisdom.
hmm
And guess what? I read research. I mean, every day I'm doing several dozen articles and all that. So I'm not going to talk about all those because
yeah.
I'm
No,
citing
I
all
think
those in the
this is
book.
really, no, I think this is good. I mean, I'm really taking away this idea of have have really powerful relationships with not a lot of people necessary, but even just one or two really crucial people that help you think through things, and to be your best self. And
Yeah,
then Carl
and
Rogers, who I think is
right.
brilliant.
Or these pieces that help me wrestle with what it means to be a good person.
Yeah,
Now, for some people, it can be faith-based, or whether it's parts of the Bible or the Quran or the Hadith or the Bhagavad Gita or the Torah. I mean, we all have these things.
yeah,
Hopefully, they can help. And for others, it could be to read some of the timeless classics.
yeah,
The Greek mythology, the Greek tragedies, the
yeah,
Shakespeare. Um,
yeah.
and it's not a bad thing to read Dante's trilogy
Not a bad
periodically.
thing. I just really, I mean, I wrote a lot about client-centered, client-led, and really leaned heavily on Roger's work because I think it's just so important. And I think it fits
Right.
beautifully, intersects with yours. So for me, that I just think it's so crucial that we learn how to be led by our clients versus leading them. I want to just say thank you so much for being on the studio today. I can't even tell you how I've put a little check mark next to this bucket. I am I'm just so happy to have had you on the show. Thank you for
Well,
your
thank you
wisdom.
very much, Lyssa, for inviting me and for having such a set of both provocative and playful questions.
Wonderful.